Hey guys, welcome back to another edition of the Cool Sports Network. I am your host, Chase Coburn, and today I am joined by a very special guest, a host and reporter for the New York Mets and MSG Networks, Mike Janela. Mike, thanks so much for coming on. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, Chase, glad to be here, man. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on. I'm glad we are able to connect. I'm a huge fan of you and your work and all the great things that you do. So I'm excited that I get to talk to you both about this industry and New York sports in general. Let's just go back to the beginning of your career, even before you got started. When did you realize you even wanted to be a sportscaster, and what has been your career path since to get to the point where you're at now?
It's probably when I was about your age or a little bit earlier than that. How old are you now?
13.
All right, so yeah, before that. So at 13, I kind of already had a good idea. But when I lose track now, probably like 10 or 11 or so. I always loved sports. My dream was to be a professional athlete, like a lot of young people, right? But I realized maybe my 10-year-old season in Little League that wasn't going to happen. I was pretty
I
terrible.
realized that way before. Yeah.
Yeah, all right, good. Hey, man, if you got there earlier than me, then good for you. Yeah, I think I had an entire season where I only made contact once, and it was a foul ball up the first baseline. So I was like, all right, this isn't going to do it for me. But then I still wanted to be involved. I still loved sports, and I remember watching a game, and I forget what game it was, and I forget what broadcaster it was. Might have been Bob Costas or Chris Berman or Al Michaels, like who knows. But they said something like something amazing had happened, a walk-off homer or a huge dunk or whatever. It might have been Cal Ripken breaking the Lou Gehrig streak. I don't know. But the guy said, man, I can't believe I'm here to witness this. I have the best job in the world. And I was watching that and I thought, well, click. That does sound like the best job in the world. Like to be a sportscaster and go to these games that I'm going to watch anyway, and I'm going to follow these sports and these teams anyway. Why not make that a career to be there
Right.
and to get paid for that? It just made sense to me. So at that point, from that point forward, I just knew, okay, do whatever you can along the way to take those steps to get to where I wanted to be. And so far, I'd say I'm doing all right. Everyone always wants to do more and different than where they are, but I'd have to say if you told the me at that age what he wanted to do, what I've been able to do, I think he'd be pretty happy.
That's amazing, and I think that's kind of it is living the dream in a sense, and I kind of found out a different way. I kind of found out during the pandemic. I've always been in love with sports and stats, and all of a sudden I found this broadcasting camp, and it did click then because like there wasn't one exact moment, maybe like as you mentioned with that one call, whatever it was, you said the dunk or the home run or maybe Cal's record, but it just kind of gradually grew on me. I've always loved sports, and you're right. I feel like this does be work for a living because you get to talk about sports for a living. You're going to follow the teams anyway, so you may as well cover them for your job. Now, I know you mentioned many times you grew up idolizing Bob Costas and his work. Were there any mentors that you knew personally that kind of helped you get to Syracuse and become the broadcaster you are today?
Getting to Syracuse at the college, not really. I was very much just kind of doing it on my own. No one in my family has ever worked in media. My school didn't really have a broadcasting department or a radio station or a sports media department or whatever. So I worked like at the student newspaper or the local newspaper. So I did a lot of writing because there was infrastructure for that. But I grew up in the last millenniums. It was like middle school when I started high school, so we didn't have YouTube or podcasting or social media or anything like that. So it was hard to do any kind of sportscasting if that infrastructure wasn't already there. So getting to college was very much just doing my own thing and just figuring it out along the way. Once I got to school, then yeah, professors. I had a bunch of great ones. My one advisor, John Nicholson, I'll shout him out. He might never hear this, but he was a sportscaster and a news anchor throughout the 70s and 80s. And he was just so instrumental in kind of calling me out on my BS and trying to make me the best version of me that I could be instead of trying to be just a copy pasted version of Bob Costas or Mike Tirico or whoever. And then at Syracuse, it wasn't so much mentors as it was peers. It was other men and women my age that I was competing against, that I was picking their brain, that I was seeing what I liked that they did or what I didn't like that they did, and figuring out what worked best for me. So at that point, it just becomes doing it and working with people that are your peers, but also your competition makes you sharper. So yeah, I wouldn't say that I didn't do any sportscasting camps growing up. I didn't have an older sibling or a news station that I interned at or anything like that that kind of guided me along the way. I do take a lot of pride in the fact that I've done a lot of this on my own. And then as you grow older, you find people in the business that do respect you as a peer and will give
Right.
you good feedback and will point you in the right direction and give you criticisms that you need or encouragement that you need. And once I kind of got established, then I felt like, okay, there's a lot of different people around that can help me out. But everyone gets there in their own way and everyone kind of has their own journey. And I just felt like I had to sort of make mine because there was really no path for me to follow.
Yeah, I actually think that's the best part for sports broadcasters, kind of in my generation, is that when you were growing up, podcasts weren't as popular. There weren't outlets like this where you could start your own shows. And I think doing stuff like this is very important. It's only going to give people a head start. Did you feel like, because I talked to Noah Eagle recently, obviously a huge broadcaster for NBC, and he does some stuff on the Yes Network, he does a ton of great things. And he kind of mentioned that not that he went into Syracuse with absolutely no goal or no direction, but he also said he went in there not trying to already build what his identity was as a broadcaster. Do you feel, because you mentioned not just being a Mike Tirico or a Bob Costas or an Al Michaels, just one of those guys and kind of being yourself, when did you really find who you were as a broadcaster?
Well, by the way, give Noah Eagle my information because he's getting jobs left and right, and I gotta get working with him. Um, no, it's interesting because I think to your point, and it wasn't even just that I grew up and this wasn't as available. It didn't exist, right? Like creating your own stuff didn't exist, so there wasn't the opportunity that you have to do these kind of conversations and these shows where you can hone your own style. So for a while, for me growing up, it was just trying to emulate different guys. And I feel like that probably continued well into the early parts of my career. And, I started as a play by play specialist. And so I took little things that I liked from different play by play broadcasters that I listened to and watched a lot growing up. And I didn't really feel, I mean, I guess it kind of was my own thing, but it was more taking something different from everybody else, combining that. And it wasn't necessarily my own thing. It was just a new thing that was a combination of a bunch of other things, which is still
Yeah,
different, but wasn't really my fingerprints all over it. And I'd say it probably wasn't until uh, even like my early 30s, I took a job with the San Diego Padres the year that I turned 30. And I was hosting a show for them on Fox Sports San Diego, RIP that network. But it was an hour long every single day where I was the only main host, and we rotated two other co hosts with me on a daily basis. And we had different guests come in. And it was my first time that I had the opportunity to make it my own. Because even play by play, when you're doing a 3 hour baseball game in the minor leagues before there was a pitch clock and it's you by yourself and you have a lot of time to fill, you still are led by the constraints of what's happening in the game. And the most important thing is describing what's happening in the game. And you can add some of your own spice to that, obviously. But doing more of a talk show or a panel show, now you've got to fill the hour with content. And doing that every day with different people, since I was the only constant, it really forced me to discover, okay, what do I want to talk about that I find fun? What are the segments that I want to create
right.
that I think are interesting? What are the questions I want to ask these guests because this is my show? So what do I want us to talk about? And being able to fill 60 minutes of time, 43 minutes with commercials, whatever, that's a lot of time to fill, right? So you start thinking about what are some fun things on May the 4th. Let's do a Star Wars segment because I love Star Wars stuff. When like Snoop Dogg is in town, let's talk about his baseball fandom,
Right.
but also his musical history. And those were opportunities I got to do there. So just having that free flowing ability, it was basically a podcast just in TV form, really allowed me to own who I was and talk in my voice. I'm much more conversational than someone like a Bob Costas. I'm much more laid back. I love putting in pop culture and outside references that maybe the diehard sports fan might not get, but the casual fan will really love and appreciate. So it was crazy because you would think by the time you're 21 or by the time you're 25 or 28, you're an adult, right? You can vote, you can drink alcohol, you can do whatever you want. You can have a lot of people have kids by that point, they're married. But even me, until I was like 30, 31, I really wasn't sure who I was on screen or on camera. But by this point, now as I approach turning 40 soon, I feel like I have a really good handle of who I am and what my kind of broadcasting style is.
And I think that is important. And you mentioned like you do want to try to take bits and pieces, but kind of having your own individuality in a sense and your own passion into it is obviously very important. It's allowed you to get so many great jobs. You cover a variety of teams, a variety of sports. Obviously, you do the work, most of your work with MSG Networks and the New York Mets. We'll get to the Mets on the diamond and all the great things they did this year. But what are your thoughts on the Knicks, right? You make the Mikal Bridges, the Carl Anthony Towns trades.
Can they give Boston a run? I think anybody can. Boston has built a real juggernaut in terms of defensively. They're extremely hard to crack. We saw what they did to the Knicks on opening night. And offensively, they've built a similar juggernaut where everybody 1 through 5 can shoot anywhere from 2 feet out to 28 feet. And that's really hard to defend no matter who you are. At the same time, though, basketball's a long season. Those series are so long. The Knicks have star players. The NBA is the most star-driven sport, and you never know what happens with injuries or with bad luck or fluke calls. So I think you certainly have the opportunity. They're in the ballpark, right? The Knicks have a shot. They're not an also ran. It's a fun team though, like fun to watch
Yeah,
them figure it out. Like they got good personalities, good names. It's a fun brand of
yeah.
basketball. It's very different than some of the Knicks teams that I certainly grew up watching. So it's just good to know that the Knicks are consistently good every year, and it's not just okay, they're good for 2 seasons and then they're in the
Right.
wilderness again for 5 or 6. It's good to know that just as long as it looks like Jalen Brunson's going to be around, this team is going to be like legitimately worth putting on TV whenever they take the floor.
Oh, yeah, Bronson's definitely been the number one player. They're lighting up Madison Square Garden. It's funny. We're talking about an incredible offense and then just lacking the defense and the depth. And usually it's been the opposite for Tom Thibodeau coach teams. We just talked about from a broadcasting perspective, identity. You make these trades for Mikal Bridges and Carl Anthony Towns, and they seem like good moves. We talk about, star-driven league. Those are great star players, but maybe it's going away from their identity. Do you feel it was right to make these drastic changes in the offseason when you're perhaps an injury away from the conference finals and who knows what happens there?
It's tough because you never know when you hit your ceiling. And I feel like, unfortunately, as much of a dog as Julius Randle was, and as great as he was carrying this team on his shoulders, before Jalen Brunson arrived and the talent that he brought and giving it, I think back to the Warriors before Steve Kerr took over and Mark Jackson was there. And I think he led them to the playoffs with Steph and with Klay Thompson in their early stages. And they got rid of him, and everyone was like, well, "What are you doing? This guy just took him to the play. Like, what's the next step?" And the front office just kind of knew already he's not going to be the guy to unlock this full potential. Steve Kerr comes in, one of the greatest dynasties we've ever seen, and reinvented the sport as we know it.
Oh yeah.
So these guys in the front office, I've learned this more with the Mets because I'm just there day to day behind the scenes more. But front office executives know a lot more than you or me or anybody else that's just watching on TV. They have these AI models and they're like proprietary stats and data, and they kind of know what a team's potential is. And then it's up to the players and health and the coaching staff, no matter what the sport is, to reach that potential. So if the Knicks front office felt like they've gotten as far as they could with that identity, with that personnel, there's a reason they made that move. It really sucks to have seen Julius go after all that he did for the Knicks, and it sucks even more to see Dante DiVincenzo go before the Nova Knicks could
Right.
really like gel and become super pals. But these front offices know what they're doing for a reason. So I think if it were me guessing, they just kind of figured, all right, we kind of took it as far as we could go in this car. We need new tires, or we need a new engine, or we need something. And
Right.
with how good Boston is and how dominant they looked last year, maybe you just felt like you had to level up, and that was their way to try and do it.
One of the other shows you host for MSG Networks is Line of Scrimmage, a weekly betting show for MSG Networks. I know you do a lot just with sports betting in general, and you have throughout your career. And one of the things I know, obviously, I can't bet. I'm 13 years old, but one of the things I always look at with like spreads and
Good. I'm happy to hear you say that.
yeah. I stay out of it, but I do obviously look at the spreads and the over unders and the odds. Just obviously curious as a sports fan and as a sports reporter to cover. And I always look at when I look at spreads. what are the implications? Who's hurt? What are the storylines? Who's home? How much? I want to specifically look at the home field. They always say, right, like the home team will get like a 3 point advantage in the spread. How important is that? I do think that is correct. How important is home field when it comes to evaluating a spread and determining whether the spread is skewed one way because of it?
In football, that's the rule of thumb, right? A home field is worth about a field goal, right? It's like a 3 point thing. So I certainly think that's been baked into the algorithms for so long that it's just kind of understood that that's kind of what it's worth. Now, the only way that really comes into play in terms of looking at that in isolation is when the teams are evenly matched, right? If you see a team that's a 3 point favorite and they're at home, then what Vegas expects is these two teams they're even. It's a coin flip, and the home field advantage is worth that little amount. So then you got to take everything else into effect. Who is injured that day? Who has been injured for a while? Who has really good success against man coverage or really struggles against blitzes? Or are they playing in Las Vegas and someone has a real long history of going out the night before in Las Vegas and now and suffering the next day? And you got to take all that stuff into account. So I certainly think it's more standardized in football, especially because the schedule is always the same. You look at baseball, you look at basketball, hockey. You could have a 7 game homestand in baseball followed by a West Coast road trip, or you could play 5 games one week and then 7 the next. Basketball, you could have a back-to-back or 3 games in 4 nights, or then you could be like the Spurs on their famous like rodeo tour where they're on the road forever.
Right.
And all these other things go into it, like resting or play load management or all these different kind of things. Whereas football, it's the same time, same day for the most part every week. It's usually the same kind of travel. You're never going to be playing like in California one day and then back home in California again. Like they try to minimize that. So I think because there's so much other stuff standardized in football, in terms of the betting, the home field element becomes more integral, whereas there are so many other variables in the other
Right.
sports that it's not that baked into the formula, I
And it's
think.
more often too as well, so you're probably not gonna get as many, but you also have to, like, kind of weigh, like, how much effort do you think Vegas spends on, like, an 82 game NBA season compared to just 17 for each team in the NFL?
I mean, the same amount, I'm sure, because it makes money, right? And
Right.
even though NFL is only 17 games, but more people probably bet on it by volume per game, the NBA is more games. So in the end, does a sports book bring in as much for a full NBA season versus a full NFL season? I don't know. I don't know those numbers off the top of my head. Playoffs obviously is a different story because I think the Super Bowl alone, a sports book will make more money than maybe an entire NBA regular season. But at this point, I would imagine Vegas has all these algorithmic models and it's all AI generated and they have it all down to a computer science. It's not like back in the 60s where some weird guy with mafia ties would be like doing the math on the back of a napkin and figuring out what the line is for a game. At this point, these guys have it drawn up so much that you just put the information into a computer. It's like schedule making. It used to be, baseball would have guys in a room and put every team on a wall and figure out who can play where and what travel. Now you just type in the teams, you type in the stuff, and it spits it out for you. So I think a lot of that legwork has been taken out of the industry. And then as computers get smarter, you see these bad beats all the time, and you just wonder, man, how did they know that this game that looked like a blowout was going to end up being only a 3.5 point game? And it blows your mind every time. So whether they're working hard or they're working easy, they're getting it right. And for them, that's what they care about most.
Yeah, they have this algorithm. They get it down to a science. I was just watching UConn Sacred Heart, men's basketball. I'm a UConn fan, but it's Sacred Heart. I live in Fairfield, so Sacred Heart, obviously a local school. I was very curious. You probably don't think that we're going to get that on the dot. I mean, it went like half a point over for the over under, and or for the spread, excuse me. And it's just like the way that they're able to get this down to a science is absolutely incredible. I want to transition away from your sports betting talk and let's go to the New York Mets because obviously you do a lot of great work for them. You mentioned you're there behind the scenes. You do a lot of in stadium work. You do hits for the Mets social media. Obviously, Jose Iglesias and the oh my God, grimace energy in New York kind of changed everything this year. They were able to achieve so much. How was this season different covering the Mets than any other? Because being there for 2 games, I could tell it was a lot of fun and a lot of great energy at Citi Field.
Yeah, when you work for a team directly, it's different than working for a network that covers the team because you are there in the day to day, and how the team performs has a huge bearing on your day to day life experience and
Right.
your mental health and your enjoyment of your job and all that. So for someone like me that does a lot of stuff based on the team doing well, when we're there live during a game, if the Mets are 25 games under 500 and it's August and there's 10,000 people in the stadium, my job becomes a lot different than if the Mets are in a playoff chase and there's 45,000 people in the stadium and everyone's kind of like bought into wanting to have a good time and being involved, and the players are happier to talk and more open because everyone's like just vibing on a different level.
Right.
So this year was certainly, and growing up a Mets fan myself, it was certainly the most fun in terms of the on-field product season I've had working for the Mets for sure. Just because there was a different story every day, and it was a great group of personalities that you wouldn't have the grimace and the OMG and all this other stuff that happened unless these personalities were open to that. I think someone had mentioned one of the players' relatives on Twitter and got a lot of flack for it. That like Max Scherzer didn't fit on this team. And even though Max still has like a great ability to pitch, can you imagine Max holding the OMG sign or like dancing with Grimace? Like, probably
Right.
not. He's not that kind of personality, right? But this was a team that was
It takes like
open
a
to
collective
having
team of
fun.
all those guys. Yeah.
Yeah, you have to buy in. And so when everyone buys in, then you have that opportunity to have a lot more fun. And, fun's what we're going for. And you have the age old question, does winning breed chemistry or does team chemistry breed winning? Same thing with these fun things. Does a winning team make a season more fun, or is it having fun more important? And then the team can be loose and pick up on that stuff. So, yeah, it was a year unlike any other. And obviously, I loved it. Wished it could have lasted longer, but way more than we expected in terms of the on field production from the team getting to the NLCS, but also behind the scenes. Like teams try and manufacture at all levels and all leagues two or three of these viral moments throughout the year, and the Mets seem to have had one every single week
Right.
this year. So it was definitely a ride that I wasn't taking for granted, and that I'm never going to forget.
Right, and I think the crazy part is they were off to a bad start. I believe it was 0-5 and 22-33 for the New York Mets. It didn't seem like this could be a team to forget make the LCS, just make the playoffs or even make a run at the playoffs. But things started to turn around in June and July. They had the best record in the National League in June. Decent. They won their first 3 games in July. They were really clicking on all cylinders in those early months of the summer. I spoke to obviously manager Carlos Mendoza during those early summer months, and he said why were they able to achieve so much? They simply had a lot of good players. How are those players? I guess you kind of touched on it earlier, but like, how are those players able to change the locker room in a sense? Because it wasn't just this fun, incredible, loose team at the beginning. It was bad. Was there a player in particular, or was it just a collective team effort for them to really switch around the momentum, the energy, and just everything that was going on with the Mets?
Well, around that time when they had dipped, I think it was, yeah, the 11 games below 500, they had a players only meeting, which supposedly Francisco Lindor and Brandon Nimmo took a lot of charge in hosting that meeting and what was said behind those doors. And after that, everyone likes to say grimace and OMG, obviously, but it really was also that meeting that kind of sparked things for them. And those were the two guys that seemed to get a lot of the attention this year in terms of being team leaders and dropping the gauntlet. What you need though is then guys to pick up that gauntlet and follow and buy in. And so I think you'll see that those are the two guys. We'll see what happens with Pete Alonso, but those are the two guys that are guaranteed to be with the Mets for the longest amount of time. They've signed the two longest term contracts, and I think they know that it is their responsibility to take that leadership mantle, not just on the field, but in the clubhouse. And
Right.
so I think those two guys are two great personalities that set the tone. And then one thing I give David Stearns a lot of credit for that a lot of people overlook is he's got a short leash, man. And he took a lot of chances on a lot of reclamation projects and 1 year guys. And if it works like Sean Manaea and Luis Severino, great. You're going to be rewarded and you're going to be in the rotation for the rest of the year. But if Joey Wendell's not producing or Zach Short or Jorge Lopez, Stearns proved that, all right, we're not going to have room for you here. And Carlos Mendoza said we had good players. There were good players. New good players were added. And baseball is a game where you can survive a really bad month because it's such a long season. So as long as you feel like you're going to regress to the mean in a positive way, then you have more faith in being able to stick the course. And as long as you have guys that are willing to maybe take more accountability and not just chalk it up to a lost year after a month and a half, you're going to get the results that they did.
Yeah, I always find that Jorge Lopez story just very crazy. I'm an Orioles fan personally, so just watching that whole thing. Obviously, he was a former All Star, one of the best closers in baseball. To kind of watch how that whole thing unravels, I guess you could say a little funny, but again, Mets achieved great things. It beat Milwaukee, Philadelphia in the playoffs. The team they lost to in the National League Championship Series, the eventual World Series champion Dodgers. So it was a great, shocking run. It was a great year for the franchise. We'll see if they can build off of that success. Before we wrap this up, I need to mention, right, because we've been talking about sports and everything, but yeah, I guess you also know a lot about a lot of different topics. You appeared on ABC's $100,000 Pyramid, won the highest money and vacation prize combo in the history of the show. What was it like to not only be on the show, but then to win it? It's such an iconic show. What was that like?
Yeah, what can I say? No, it was a blast, and I've always loved game shows. I've always loved trivia and those kind of games, like party games. So that $100,000 pyramid is just a giant party game, basically. And yeah, it was great. I didn't think it was real. Growing up, I never knew how do people get on Jeopardy or Wheel of Fortune or Price is Right. And now with the internet, it was just great to be able to see like, oh, we're looking for contestants and applying for it and auditioning and realizing during the audition process that I was really good at that game. And then just getting the chance to actually go on and play was incredible. But I'm very competitive when it comes to that kind of stuff. So the moment
I'm
I
right there
walked
with
on
you.
set, yeah, the moment I walked on set, I was like, I'm not here to just be on TV and meet Michael Strahan. I'm here to win. And so I was just kind of ruthless in how seriously I took the game. They always try and tell you leading up, the producers, make sure to have fun. We want like good TV and bright personalities and make jokes. And I was like, yeah, I'll do that if there's time, but I'm here to win. And so I was more focused on getting that job done. And then, yeah, nobody had ever won the full 150 grand and the bonus vacation they give in the show's history. And I was the first one to do it. So it was thrilling and exhilarating and awesome and a lifelong memory. And I was unemployed at the time for like 9 months. I couldn't find any work. So winning all that money like literally changed my life because I didn't have to go become an accountant or something just to make money. I was able to kind of survive while waiting for the next hosting and media job. And I think one of my next jobs was ending up at the Mets, and now here we are today. So it's crazy how those things work out sometimes. But yeah, it was sick. It was great.
It's like a childhood dream coming true being on one of those shows. So, today, I guess, guys, you've learned we're talking to a host, and we're also talking to one of the greatest contestants in one of the most classic TV shows history. So, I always wrap up my episodes like this, asking my guest about a piece of advice in their industry. What would be your number one piece of advice? Maybe not to a game show contestant, but to a sports broadcaster. What would be your biggest piece of advice and why?
I would be remiss though if I didn't humble myself and say that I also appeared on Jeopardy and got completely curb stomped on that show. So I'm not a game show whiz. I make them, but I don't always dominate them. So I just
Understood.
wanted to make sure to put a button on that. Uh, Piece of advice I give to someone in my industry is to network like hell. It's a business that is entirely all about who you know and being ready for opportunities when they're available. The problem is those opportunities might not ever be known to you. And mine is a business. A lot of businesses are who you know and right place, right time. But you look at sports casting, and there are so many people that have connections that you might not. People like Noah Eagle, whose dad has been doing this forever. Joe Buck, whose dad Jack did it forever before him. Kevin Harlan, and you go the Alberts, and you go on and on and on. So, or former athletes. Tony Romo, as soon as he wanted Tom Brady, they could make one phone call and say, "Hey, I want to be on TV," and call him play-by-play, and it's going to happen. So you're going against so many people that have so many other things that you might not. So what you got to do is make connections everywhere you go. I'm really applaud you and doing this podcast because you get to meet a lot of people. I'm probably very low on that list of influence, but you now have access to people that you can check in on and keep up with as time goes by and your career marches forward. But there were early jobs where I was so focused on just do the work, do a good job, be impressive, and I forgot to make friends with the producer or reach out to someone in a different network and kind of talk to them about what I'm up to. And then you lose those opportunities when you move on to the next thing or when you don't have a job anymore. So it's network, network, network. Create your own content or be hired to do content, either way. But the most important thing is just build relationships and try and maintain those relationships because you never know who you might meet that could really help you out down the road.
Thank you so much for that piece of advice. They always say, who you know gets you there, what you know keeps you there. So you have to have a combination of that networking.
My man, you nailed it. Exactly.
Mike Janela, thank you so much for coming on today talking about the industry, your game show experience, and obviously the New York Mets and all the great New York sports teams. Really appreciate it.
Chase, my pleasure, man. Anytime. We'll see you next time.
See you next time. Yes, thank you guys so much. The audience, I hope you guys did enjoy. Alongside Mike Janela, a host for MSG Networks and the New York Mets, I'm your host, Chase Coburn. And we will see you next time right here from the Cool Sports Network. Take care.